All right, we need to talk about something that's, well, it's incredibly tough, but so important. We're going to be looking at the connection between disability and human trafficking. It's a link that often exists in the dark, leaving some of the most vulnerable people in our society completely exposed. So, let's get right into it.
Now, before we go any further, I want to be super clear. What we're talking about today isn't just opinion. This is all coming from some really rigorous, evidence-based research from Oxon Advisory, led by Professor Stan Gilmore. So we're looking at hard data and the real human stories behind it all.
And this quote from the research, man, it just hits you right in the gut, doesn't it? It frames the whole problem perfectly. We are talking about invisible victims. Think about that for a second. These are people who are literally unseen by the very systems that are supposed to protect them. And that gap, well, that's where the exploitation just thrives.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the hidden intersection itself. Then, we'll unpack what's called the two-way street of harm. After that, we'll zoom in on a specific unseen injury, brain trauma. We'll ask why the system is failing these individuals. And finally, we'll talk about the pathways to actually protecting them.
So, right off the bat, let's be clear. The link between disability and trafficking isn't some random coincidence. It's a pattern, a really disturbing one. The research makes it clear that things like poverty, being socially isolated, or having less access to education, all things that disproportionately affect people with disabilities, well, they create the exact set of vulnerabilities that traffickers are actively looking for.
And that pattern leads to something, well, it's a truly vicious cycle. You see, it's not just that people with disabilities are targeted. The act of trafficking itself can cause severe, life-altering disabilities. The researchers call this a bidirectional relationship, or a two-way street of harm. And here's how that cycle works, and it's just brutal. On one hand, traffickers specifically target people who already have a disability. But then, on the other hand, the horrific experience of being trafficked, the physical violence, the neglect, the constant psychological trauma can cause devastating disabilities in people who were not disabled before. It's a trap designed to be almost impossible to escape.
And look, if you're thinking this is some rare fringe issue, think again. This number, over 2,000, that's just the potential victims with disabilities that were identified by one hotline over a 3-year period. It's a huge number, but you have to know it's almost certainly just the tip of the iceberg.
You know, to really understand the human cost here, let's zoom in on one specific horrifying injury that often gets completely overlooked: an acquired brain injury. This is one of the most severe and invisible disabilities that trafficking can cause. So you hear the term traumatic brain injury, or TBI. What does that actually mean? It's when an external force damages the brain. And we're not just talking about a bump on the head. This kind of injury can completely change a person's ability to think, to control their emotions. It can literally change who they are.
So how does this happen to someone in a trafficking situation? Well, it's not just one thing. First, there's the obvious: direct physical violence, assaults that cause direct trauma. But it also happens in more subtle and honestly more sinister ways. Get this, the research found that 96% of survivors reporting needing basic things like food. 96%! Severe malnutrition literally starves the brain of what it needs to function. And on top of that, victims are often forced into substance misuse, which can permanently alter their brain chemistry. These are the unseen injuries that last a lifetime.
Okay, so all of this is happening, which leads to the big, frustrating question. Why? Why aren't these victims being found? Why aren't they getting the help they so desperately need? The answer, unfortunately, lies in these deep, systemic failures that keep them invisible.
Yeah, why does this keep happening? It's so easy to just blame the traffickers. And of course, they are monsters. But the research shows the problem goes much deeper. It's about the system itself and its blind spots.
When you dig in, you see these massive cracks in the system where people just fall through. First, you've got law enforcement and first responders, who often just don't have the specialized training to recognize the red flags in someone with a disability. Then, there's the legal system, which often fails to provide really basic accommodations, like an interpreter, so a survivor can't even tell their story. And finally, and this is a huge one, the services are siloed. Trafficking services don't know how to handle disabilities, and disability services don't know how to spot trafficking trauma. The victims are caught right in the middle, with nowhere to go.
All right, so after all of that, it can feel pretty hopeless. But it's not. The whole point of this research from Oxon Advisory isn't just to point out the problem, it's to give us a roadmap forward, a way to start fixing this.
And these aren't just vague ideas. They are concrete, actionable steps. It means we have to build disability awareness into every single anti-trafficking policy. It means developing specialized training for the people on the front lines. We've got to start actually collecting the data so we understand how big this problem really is. And maybe most importantly, we have to create services that can handle both trafficking trauma and disability needs at the same time. We have to break down those silos.
So at the end of the day, everything we've talked about, this whole heartbreaking issue, it really all comes down to this one question. How do we make the invisible visible? Everything, the cycle of harm, the broken systems, the paths to protection, it's all about answering that. That's the challenge this research leaves us with. How do we make sure every single victim is seen, heard, and protected?